Hi everyone, my name is Ms. Hu and I am a physics teacher. In this video, I will be going through an overview of physical quantities. This is a fundamental and basic topic which you must be able to understand before you can progress in your physics lessons. Now, what are physical quantities? Physical quantities are defined as quantities that can be measured. So, physical quantities are actually the terms that are given to what we measure. For example, you already know this: length, mass, time, volume, area, speed. These are all terms that represent what we are measuring, and these are known as physical quantities. Physical quantities have to be stated with both its magnitude and its unit. For example, when you want to express the value of length, you must mention the value of 100, which is the magnitude, and meters, which is the unit. Now, physical quantities can be divided into two categories, which are base and derived quantities. Now, what are they? Let's start with base quantities first. Base quantities are physical quantities that cannot be derived from any other quantity. When we use the term quantity, by the way, it is more like a short form, which also means physical quantities. So base quantities are physical quantities that cannot be derived from any other physical quantity. What the term derived here means is mathematically to be able to obtain a brand new quantity from other physical quantities. So base, like the term implies, base quantities are the most fundamental of all quantities that exist in the world. Typically, they can only be obtained through direct measurements and not through calculations. Now, let's go through the list of base quantities. You must remember that there are thousands and thousands of physical quantities that exist in the world, but there are only 7 base quantities, and here's the list. The 7 base quantities are length, mass, time, temperature, current, luminous intensity, and amount of substance. You also need to know their corresponding SI units as listed in this table. It is common for a lot of teachers to focus only on 5 base quantities, which are the first 5 in this list. We don't normally focus on luminous intensity and amount of substance much because these 2 base quantities very rarely come up in topics or chapters in our physics syllabus, whether it's SPM or IGCSE O-Levels. So you'll find that a lot of teachers and even books only mention the first 5. But it's good for your own knowledge to be aware that there are actually 7 base quantities that exist in this world. And again, these base quantities are as in this list: length, mass, time, temperature, current, luminous intensity, and amount of substance. Now you'll find that amount of substance is covered in chemistry. So if you're taking chemistry, you will learn about the concept of moles. Now let's go through the concept of derived quantities. Derived quantities are physical quantities that are derived from other quantities through multiplication or division. These other quantities could be either base or even other derived quantities. So remember, I mentioned earlier that there are thousands and thousands of physical quantities. As long as that quantity is not listed in the base quantity list, it is definitely a derived quantity. So that's how you tell whether or not the quantity is a base or derived quantity. If it's not on the base quantity list, I'll just go back the slide to show you one more time here. As long as the quantity is not on this list, it is a derived quantity. But of course, the best way to determine whether something is actually a derived quantity would be to see if it fits this definition. Just to let you know though, sometimes certain quantities may not appear on this list, but they're still considered base quantities. Normally, those quantities are the same type of quantity. Let's go through a simple example. For example, length can be expressed in other terms. You may come across some of these terms, for example, as width, as height, distance, even diameter, radius, thickness. So all of those are actually a type of length. Even though those terms do not appear in this list, however, they are a type of length, which means that they are also base quantities. So one more time, remember, these are the only 7 base quantities that exist in the world. If they do not fall in this list or are any of the same type of the quantities in this list, then they are derived quantities. Now, to make it easier for you to understand what we mean when we say derived, and derived in this case is through multiplication or division, let's go through a couple of examples of derived quantities and how they are formed from other quantities. The first example would be something that you're already familiar with. Now, let's say you would like to calculate the area of this rectangle. As you already know, area of a rectangle is calculated as length times width. However, you've got to remember that width is actually a type of length. So even though width does not appear in the base quantity list, it is a type of length, so we can consider width also as a base quantity. In this case, because I want to stick to terms in our base quantity list, I'm going to rename width as length. So if we want to calculate the area of this rectangle, we can express it as length times length. In terms of the units, and I'm going to use SI units over here. Length is meter, which means that the unit is actually meter times meter. And that's how we get the unit for area as meter squared. Going through another example of a derived quantity that you are familiar with, speed. Now, speed is calculated as distance over time. Also, just bear in mind that even though distance does not appear in the list of base quantities, distance is actually exactly the same thing as length, which means that distance is also a base quantity. I'm not going to rename it over here. Let's keep it as distance. To obtain the unit, distance is meter and time is second. Again, we'll just stick to SI units in this case. And that's how we get the unit for speed as meters per second. So I hope you have found this video helpful in doing an overview of physical quantities as well as base and derived quantities. Don't forget to click like and hit subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching and happy studying.